So, welcome to today's webinar. So, we're going to be digging into quite a big challenge and even a bigger opportunities. How can retail leaders learn from best practices in driving performance using customer insights? So, I'm Georgina Nelson. I'm founder and CEO of TruRating. And I started this company with one goal to basically level the playing field between bricks and mortar retailers and ecom. For too long, the big ecom giants had had the data advantage, and so I set out to change that. At TruRating, we capture feedback from over 80% of customers in real time, in the moment, tied to what they bought, how much they've spent, and how often they return. So, no more patching together of unrepresentative, untimely surveys, no more guesswork. It's just the truth, just hearing back from the vast majority of your customers. And that means it's actionable. And we found that when retail executives get this kind of data, it's not just about driving performance, it's about measuring it as well. And this is the data which boards really pay attention to, and it's tied directly to retail outcomes. But I guess the question is, with all of this wealth of insight, what should we be really looking at? Many executives have focused additionally on NPS or campaign readouts, etc., but that's only really scratching the surface. So the big question which we're here to ask today is, what are the best retail boards doing to drive performance in these pretty turbulent times, and how can customer experience data help inform them better? So I'm thrilled to have Don Williams join us today. He's a personal great friend and a huge supporter of TruRating through the years, and he's spent over the last decade partner at KPMG leading on their retail practice and advising retail boards on their strategy. So Don, fantastic to have you here.
Hi,
So I
George.
guess
Thanks for inviting me.
yeah. Let's get cracking. Tell me, what have you been hearing over the
Well,
last while? What's the biggest trends in the retail boards?
well, I think it's probably worth sort of stepping back and just giving a bit of context, which I think we know, but I think it's worth understanding or just sort of unpicking. And clearly, it might be slightly nuanced by market, and we'll get into that because I think as we get deeper, it starts to get slightly nuanced by subsector and by size as well. But if you think about the macro bit, the way I think I've thought about it is, if you start with the sort of how much money are we going to spend if you think about the UK market as consumers this year and the year after? We're going to spend just a little bit more this year than we did last year, and we're going to spend just a little bit more the year after because that's what we've tended to do. The challenge then is, but what about the impacts that we're feeling on how much we've got to spend? Because I think actually, although we'll spend more, we'll buy less because of the inflationary environment. So yes, wages in the UK have started to outstrip inflation over the last sort of 12 months or so, but the hangover from the sort of double digit times, that takes quite a long time to
Mm,
unwind into us feeling wealthier and therefore actually having more money to spend because it takes a while for our wages to start to outstrip. And look, inflation was what, 3% last month or this month. That just means that prices are rising less fast. They're still rising, so there's still an impact there. Then, if you think about the interest rate environment, we had quite a significant jump in interest rates from sort of money being free, and that has impacted as many of those. And there are actually not that many people in the UK who have mortgages, but it's impacted the rental market as well because of the way
mm,
that that has, that and that we have to live in a home. That becomes a really important purchase for us. So that's a challenge on our wallets, and therefore how much we've got left over to spend on the other stuff. And then I think you've got quite an interesting thing around confidence of how people feel, and some of that is tied to job prospects, and some of that is tied to the sort of general noise in the marketplace, which I think we all recognise over the last few months as there have been a few balls thrown at all of us, businesses as well as individuals. Um, but I think from an employment point of view, the unemployment stats in the UK are pretty robust, but I think that masks a few areas where if you're in a specific area, that's where it becomes quite new. If you're in,
mm,
say, large scale consulting, there's been a number of layoffs there. If you're in the sort of retail, leisure, and hospitality space, I think there's been some headcount reduction in that space because of the reaction that people took to the national insurance rises. So
Mm,
overall, you've got, I think, a consumer who is a little bit nervous than they were before. Probably, my old employer do a sort of financial security consumer pulse piece. That's just come out. You know, yes, 55% of people are saying they feel financially secure, but that's slightly reduced from a quarter before. So I think there is some nervousness around there. And then you go, right, so and where are you going to choose to spend your money?
mm,
Well, you've got one place which you don't have any choice in, the sort of non-discretionary food, and food price inflation has been quite high. And then you've got, therefore, that's going to put some pressure on your discretionary purchases. And then when you start to get into those sort of categories, I think we're starting to see certain categories, health and beauty still feels pretty buoyant, but other categories slightly more challenged. So footwear and clothing potentially, because we have to spend the money on the food, and if we're going to choose to spend it, we're going to choose to spend on health and beauty. And some of the data from the Consumer Pulse survey suggests that we're actually reducing some of that spend on stuff that is like takeaway food and eating out, because that's a choice you're having to make day by day. So I think we've got a consumer that is a little bit nervous, lacking a bit of confidence, and having to make quite difficult choices about where they spend.
mm,
Um, and then I think there's some extra nuance within that, because even if you're in a subcategory that's doing quite well, I still think there are winners and losers that we're starting to see within those categories. So, and your job really is to try and be on the winning circle of that, clearly. Um, but it does feel like it's a bit of a market share game, which means that if you're at a scale where you're protecting market share, that's a bit of a tough game to play, because where's the general growth in the market? And but the upside of that is, if you're growing into that market, there's a massive opportunity, because you can grow into this market. So there is interest in newness, there is interest in innovation, there is interest in having a great experience. People will spend if you give them reason to do so. So there's definite opportunity there, but you've got to fight quite hard for it. And I think in that context, then you go, so if it's like that, I mean, there's a very old joke about two students walking across the savannah, isn't there? They get chased by lions, and one decides to put their running shoes on, and the other student says, well, you're never going to outrun the lions. And he goes, well, I just don't have to. I just have to outrun you. So there is a bit of that in this marketplace. What is it that I can have at my disposal that allows me to run a little bit faster than my competition?
And
To
what
delight.
are the trainers? What's the
Well,
yeah, what are they what are you saying as clever strategies in this race?
I think there's a macro bit that the supply chains have obviously been disturbed because of the tariff
Mm,
situation, but it was being disturbed before then anyway, even the post-COVID bit. Um, and there was a slight move away for some categories, away from that sort of China piece to some other places that you could operate in. Part of that was just smart, right? So it was
mm,
about building some resilience. Unfortunately, as you start to, if you have two or three places you're buying from, you're going to introduce complexity. If you introduce complexity, that tends to come with a bit of cost. And in an era where there's a lot about margin protection, you don't really want to layer in costs. So you're trying to play this sort of optimal game of, what's the right number of places for me to be able to buy from? How quickly can I react to it? Continue those great relationships with the suppliers, as well as get the product to my customer when he or she wants it and needs it, without the disturbance. So there's a whole piece around the supply chain bit. Um, Clearly, in the last 3 or 4 weeks, especially in the UK, with the news is around cyber security, that's sort of gone
mm,
right up the agenda, and so that I think has focused the minds, but that becomes a point in time rather than a strategy in and of itself. And then there's this whole piece around. So uh, I think a lot of boards are thinking, well, or businesses are thinking, if it's a game of market share, then what capabilities do I have? skills, what assets, what resources do I have that I can monetize that somebody else would pay me to have access to. So
Mm.
that might be supply chain experience. It might be distribution. It might be my website. It might be my customer base and me really understanding my customer so that I can provide access to other people. So retail media is significantly talked about, but that's about trying to find a way to raise revenue, actually quite high
Mm.
margin revenue, without needing to sell one extra piece of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think the customer piece then plays into that. I'm really understanding who he or she is and what you have to do to be able to delight them. Because the other piece that's happening, I think, is it's getting increasingly expensive to acquire or reactivate a customer using digital marketing. That cost is just going north. So how do I find a way to make sure that I'm spending effectively and finding a customer that will continue to come back? And when they start to buy from me, how do I delight them so they choose to come back? Better, how can I help them to advocate for their friends to buy from me too? So the whole really understanding the detail around what's driving your customer to purchase, what's driving your customer to purchase more often. So frequency,
Mm.
what's driving your customer to say, actually, my friends, you need to buy from here too. This is great product. You can start to understand that and really activate those strategies and do that on a very consistent basis. I think you end up being in the winning category and you're starting to build an asset that potentially you can monetize for others as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So like when you think of those brands who are doing this well, how are they doing it? Like in terms of CX strategies, what do you think is really resonating?
Well, I think one of your points you made, the whole reason almost you started with TruRating was if we step right back to, I always felt that if you were a catalog retailer going into this digital sort of you could buy online age, you were in a you had a built-in advantage because you could you can only send a catalog to somebody who you know where they live. Right.
Mm.
So you need to know their address, you need to know how they are, so you can then activate them. So you were built on this sort of perspective of one individual customer. So the whole structure of it was. Whereas if you were predominantly store-based retailer, it sort of didn't matter. You just had to be in a place where there were enough of those people, and
Location,
then
location.
and it looked okay, so people came across the threshold. And once they're in, you didn't really know you didn't need to know who he or she was at an individual level. You just had to have enough of them coming across the threshold. Now, I think, given the environment, combining those two areas, so really understanding who he or she is that's coming across the threshold, what they're doing inside the store, as well as what he or she is doing online, because I think when we started this, I think they were way back. People thought there'd be just these two customers. One would shop online and one would shop in store,
Mm.
and they wouldn't cross over. That's just not the way we. That's not the way we're shopping. It's when we're moving between channels, and we're often moving between channels in one of them,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
so having some perspective on what your customer is doing and how they're interacting you, how they're choosing to interact with you, and the pain points in that whole journey from research to an inspiration all the way through to purchase and even to post purchase, I think is almost essential now. But it needs to be combined across the channels.
And well, I guess like yeah, I still think we've been talking about siloed online and in store for, ever since I got into this world a decade ago, and I still, it still seems a perpetual challenge. Do you think it really is a focus in the boardroom around executives? It really, are you seeing the world really waking up to trying to address understanding their customer there, or is it still just a sort of rhetoric, basically?
I, there's a lot of conversation about it, and then there's some boys who really do get it, right? And
Right.
they are really, and I think it at some point the sort of KPI pyramid, if you like, which probably
Mm.
started with sort of like what's the profitability we have by location or by channel? Next, what's the profitability by product? And then the profitability by customer eventually gets turned on its head, and you're really only interested in what's your profitability by customer, irrespective of which channel they shop in. And
Mm,
you're interested in what products am I producing that my customers are buying that I'm making money out of. So in an era of margin protection, we've definitely seen businesses focus on, you know, which are the products that I'm really producing that is making my money and which aren't. So
mm.
that's been a typical reaction to this environment is let's cut out the number of SKUs that we're holding that we're offering.
So
Um,
when you think about those boards, which you think, are introducing those customer KPIs as a real focus, I is there commonalities in how those boards are made up? Are you saying that, the chief customer officer, etc., really, flying the flag, or, what are there commonalities in the makeup of those boards, which you think
uh,
is setting them up for success?
so I think the composition of boards is quite an interesting topic in and of its own, especially when we're starting to think about the sort of the customer metrics or the technology piece, the bit
Mm,
to it. I I reflect that I can't. Somebody will prove me wrong, and I hope they do. But I can't find. I've only found one IT CTO who is a chair. So
mm,
CTOs and CMOs, you don't find a lot of them in that sort of NED or chair role, and you don't find a lot of them that make it to CEO. There are a few, but they're not. They're not
yeah,
full. Both of those areas are quite full of um, language and science and technicality. And I think a lot of the CEOs and therefore the boards, there's a little bit of distrust between them because that's not the area that they've come at in. And this is it's a relatively still relatively new science, right? It's still a relatively new language. So having people around the boardroom table that have had that experience and that can effectively both um, engage and engorge the language that your chief customer officer or your CTO is talking to you about. We need to do this system change. We need to have this data. This is what this data means. This is how we change it, and can effectively engorge it, but also challenge it and go, yeah, I understand that that's how do we make it? What do we have to do to make it different? Those skills I think are not omnipresent around many boardrooms, particularly in those sort of senior sort of seasons people, so NEDs, chairs, CEO.
mm,
So where you can, I um, think about. I think we're all striving, aren't we, for um, diversity of thought and experience around our boardroom table. We talk about the easy to measure stuff, but actually what we're striving for is diversity of thought and experience. So when you're thinking about your board, I think trying to find senior people to be able to support and challenge, because to me it's the same thing. It's like an arch, isn't it? It only stands up because these things push against each other. That's why they're beautiful. Um, Having people on that side can be a really beneficial to a chief customer officer or to a CTO.
yeah,
Okay, they shouldn't. I don't think they should see that as a threat. I think they should see that as a real opportunity for them because they're going to have uh, at best an ally and definitely someone who understands their language.
yeah,
So I think we need to think quite carefully about the skills and experience of the people around our board that can provide the platform for our chief customer officers and our customer insights people and our chief technology officers to be able to really thrive around that boardroom table.
yeah, yeah. I couldn't agree more. I remember speaking to a retailer recently, and they were saying one of the board members brings a teddy bear to each board meeting, and the teddy bear represents the customer. And yeah,
I,
although
it's I mean, we say that in amusement. I did I had the great privilege of doing some consulting in a sports environment a while back when we were trying to make sure that the three home nations in the sport operated together. And I took all the board members out onto the pitch to see the teams train and play and perform. And I was like, because when you're sat in the boardroom or you're sat in that, you're making
Mhm.
decisions. You know, you're making decisions that affect these individuals and whether or not they can go to Olympic Games and thrive. We're making decisions about whether our customers want to come through our threshold, like whether that's digitally or through the physical threshold, and whether they want to return and whether they want to buy and whether they want to advocate for us. So I think that I I like
Walk the
the
walk.
theatre of it. Yeah, I really do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's great.
I think what we've and I don't know whether you've heard similar things, but when we speak to, chief customer officers, there's and those in the CX industry, there's been this I guess on this journey where they've really struggled at pulling together the ROI of the initiatives which they've pushed across. And because, boards are generally so run on these financial metrics, what the customer feedback has become a sort of point of interest, oh, look, here we go. This is what all
Dog.
interrupts.
There's a dog.
Yeah, the dog was 5 minutes ago, and now my toddler son is here to say,
Oh, excellent.
you're
I
going to
love
say
seeing
hello,
your
guy.
son. I see a lot of him. Hello, how are you?
Hello, hello.
Haven't
Right.
seen you since our last call with
This is
Christian.
the joys of working from home. That's a reality check for us all. But
He's obviously got a good arm. He's got his baseball in one hand. Your
yeah.
dad's not going to be happy about that. He'd rather it was a red
Yeah.
ball with a
We'll
seam.
change it for a cricket ball when we go back to England for the
That's
summer.
the way forward, George.
Um, but yeah, essentially, it seems that increasingly, if you can't really connect customer feedback to those core financial KPIs, which so many boards are driven on, it's a real challenge to get that attention. And I speak to many CX professionals, and it seems that customer feedback has become, at a brand level, it's interesting and there's focus on it, but there's a real problem at sort of driving actionability down at the store level. And yeah, being able to equate it to financial metrics. Like, what's your experience with that?
I'm with you completely, and I mean, maybe I would say this because I'm sort of, well, I trained as an accountant, so maybe I would say this, but I do think it is necessary to tie that into the so what. So if our customers are saying that, so what? So what are we going to do about it? And how does that change the way in which we act so that they buy more, buy more often, or advocate for us more? What are we actually going to do with it? So it's fine to have the feedback. You've got to tie it back into something actionable. I think one of the challenges we're going to get as we get more and more data on this stuff is being able to cut through to see what those two or three things are that we need to get done that makes the greatest difference. So I understand, and that's also why I say there's a bit of a language barrier and an interpretation barrier there, isn't there? Between we've got a lot of CEOs and CFOs around tables who are pretty comfortable with the finances, and chairs likewise, and some of the Neds too, less so. Some of the people who are comfortable from the sort of chief customer CMO type world, which is why that interpretation needs to happen.
Yeah.
Both really essential. Both look at the business from a slightly different diversity of thought point of view, so they're super valuable. But how they interact with each other and how you influence your CEO, CFO with some very specific actions. And it does need to, I do think it needs to be rooted in what can we really do to drive performance in our business.
Mm.
Like, don't just give me the insights, give me the so what to the insights.
Yeah. Yeah, it always just strikes me the fundamental principle is like if you know what your customers want, every business just wants to deliver for their customers because that's the essence of business success. But it seems that it's so, essentially so broken in many of the more traditional models which are out there.
I
And
think it's I think it's really, really, really difficult for any C-suite executive to have a customer experience of their own business.
mm,
So uh, if you go into a store as a CEO or as a CMO, you'll, or if you buy something online, it's not, you're not necessarily going to see it through your customer's eyes. It's just impossible because probably the store manager thinks knows you're arriving, knows who you are, so dials up, or and online you'll know the workaround, won't you? So it won't be that you can never have a first purchase again,
Mm,
can you? Like
yeah.
you can never have a first kiss again. It's the same. So you've got to try and find. You've got to be able to look through somebody else's eyes to see how that experience really interacts with them, how your shop assistants, store assistants make that individual go, that was a moment of truth, and I want more of it, and I'm going to tell my colleagues about it. And one of the things we've talked about, I think, is the volume of data you're producing, you're getting in store at point of purchase means that we also are reducing this amplification of either end of the normal distribution. So post purchase only gives you generally only do if you're super happy or super grumpy. So
Mm,
you've amplified the and either end of the normal distribution. You haven't actually found out what most of your company customers experience really is and what would incentivize them or encourage them to do something, more and more often, which is all you're
yeah.
trying to do, isn't it?
And I completely understand the temptation to always act on, someone who's taken that time to complain. But, making business decisions about something where they might just be, totally unrepresentative of the rest of the customer base, and you're just continually chasing the squeaky wheel, is just so, so dangerous because, you might only be changing the experience to meet that tiny percent when the rest of your customers may have wanted something completely different. So, yeah,
And I'm not saying you shouldn't do that because you definitely should, right?
yeah, yeah.
You have to, and I think we all know all the research tells you that if you can take a bad experience and turn it into a good one, then you can create a greater ambassador or advocate for your business than you can do that can
Yeah,
just having
yeah,
that
yeah,
normal
yeah.
kind of so, which is sort of weird because if you really took that to its illogical conclusion, you would engineer in a bad outcome, wouldn't you? So you could rescue it brilliantly. Um, and now I'm definitely not advocating that, but what I am advocating is actually we're missing a whole, I think, especially in store, we're missing a whole bunch of people who have an okay experience. But
Yeah,
actually, you don't have to turn this dial. If you can turn this dial from, a 5 experience to a 6 experience, it means they'll buy a little bit more often. There might be a bit more, and they'll probably tell their friends to come and buy.
yeah,
Right?
yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah. I
really
agree.
the 3 things I think you're trying to achieve in the market. And you don't have to do that amazingly. You just have to do that better than your competition.
Yeah,
Right. So,
just
and
put on the
if,
trainers.
right, I'm sort of like, if someone gives you just a little bit, I mean, it's back to the Dave Brailsford sort of, marginal gains thing. I think you don't need a little bit. I think, there are some
Mm,
quite interesting stats about the gap between first and fourth in Olympic Games across about 10 events is under a second.
yeah.
You don't need a lot, but you do need, if there's a little marginal gain, a little bit of a head start you can get, then
And
why
I,
would you not take it?
and I think for these enterprise retailers, it's just about closing the execution gap, to be honest, because you can get that overall gain at a brand level just by focusing on those lowest performing stores. And, I think, yeah, I think if you can, take like improve customer experience in bite-sized chunks by focusing, actually where it matters, where that customer is meeting your brand in those stores, and yeah, and just focus on those lowest performing stores at getting them, as you say, just a bit increasingly bit better. That just rises up to the top level in the brand. So
And I'm also a massive fan of catching people doing great stuff and replicating it. Right. So
mm,
we talk about uplifting the bottom, which is yes, if we can catch the people at the top doing stuff that's brilliant
yeah,
and
train
just
it.
going try this, see if it
Yeah,
works. Right. It's definitely working up for these people at this store because they're knocking it out the park. And it won't be rocket science.
Is there any retailer which you can think in terms of your try this? Any final advice you'd want to give to people listening as to things which you've seen working, which you think um are yielding great results?
It's really difficult, isn't it? Because
As you say,
to
every
pick out
vertical. Yeah.
and invidious to pick one out. I do think the Zara app is quite an interesting
Hmm.
combination of where you can shop digitally and in the real world at the same time, and it changes its nature as depending on where you are. I think that's pretty
I
smart. It's
haven't
quite
used it.
engaging.
Tell me a bit more.
It allows you to shop online, but when you get in the store, it turns into almost a store assistant for you. So it's quite I think it's quite smart. So I think there's you
And
just
bridging that
and
gap between the
I
customer and the
yeah.
experience. Yeah.
I look, and I've also always been a great advocate. Is just go out and see what your competitors are doing, and have the customer experience with them, um, and also with your adjacencies. So I think we forget that we can just steal a little bit from somebody else and put it into our business, and it makes a real difference. Um, way back as old thoughts here, but those sort of snaky queues that you see at airlines and in
Yeah.
everywhere now, so they're all stolen from Disney, because it makes you feel like you're moving, and then they just
Ah,
shipped it into the consumer landscape. Um, uh, Business class seats on an aircraft. When they were trying to solve that problem, people went, "Well, who else does great design in a limited space? Yacht designers." So taking
cool.
something that's an adjacency and going, "How can I lift it and shift it, or lift it, shape it,
Yeah.
and shift it?" I think is an interesting way to think about it. So be
And I guess
continuing being curious.
taking that wider lens to who you might view as a competitor actually could, be a lighthouse brand in a completely different vertical who's just doing customer experience really right. So,
Right,
yeah.
completely. You said something right at the start there. There is something about this which starts to make you feel quite tired because you use the word relentless. But there is a sort of relentless execution piece to this market, I think. There's people who just do the basics brilliantly, time after time after time, will win in this marketplace. I'm sure of that.
We're approaching 1 billion pieces of customer feedback now, and that's just basically what we've seen. We've measured the impacts of new technologies, new store layouts, product ranges, price slashes, and the one thing which always yields people spending more in the moment and returning more frequently is the behavior of the in-store teams and whether they're providing a good service. And it always just when it's back to, as you said, 101 sales and retail, get the basics right. So,
And how amazing is that? Like, if you make it really easy for a customer, so your about eight, almost 9 out of 10 customers will willingly provide some feedback, right? Because you gave them the opportunity. Like, they don't have to. They're given it. There's 1 billion people have chosen to go 1 or 9 or 1 or 5 or 9. I think,
yeah.
like, what a gift,
Thanks.
right?
Yeah, it's
It's amazing, right?
yeah,
And
we're
all you
proud.
gave them was the opportunity to do it, and
Yeah, they
then
want to
some of the
feedback.
magic happens.
Yeah. Well, what a way to end this amazing chat, Don. Thank you so much, and sorry for the interruptions with toddlers and dogs.
Loved it.
Welcome to my world.
Great. I knew it would be dogs. I didn't think I thought it might be him because I've seen him a bit before. So say hi
Thank
to Christian
you.
for me as well.
Pardon?
Say hi to Christian for me as well.
Will do. I will. Thank you so much. And to everyone else listening, yeah, this is just the journey of our webinars, really looking at how you can drive the impact of your customer insight strategies at a board level and beyond. So thank you, Don. And yeah, looking forward to catching up with you very soon.
Pleasure.